everyone, how's it going? I thought I'd just do a little demo about how I went about the Bruce Lee animation piece that I recently did. If you haven't seen it, I'll send you a link. But basically, I just decided to do a little short animated piece based on one of my heroes, Bruce Lee, and animate directly in Unreal. I've done it in the past, but it's been a while since I did something, you know, more in depth, if you will. And I got the chance to explore with Unreal 5.5 preview, so some of the features that are in it. And this video is just to get over my process and how I set it up and how I started animating and how I just eventually came to the end result, which I'm, you know, pretty pleased with. Things can always be better, but yeah, I got to a point where I was pretty, you know, satisfied with the end result. Anyway, so here what I'm showing here is my scene where, in another video which I'll drop a link, how to set up an image sequence in your level, so you can, you know, whatever reference you're using to use your animation to find your timing, to find your key poses and so forth. So in this case, just basically I grabbed a section of the Bruce Lee performance with Chuck Norris where he's just simply deflecting things and kicking them at the end. Pretty straightforward stuff. I could have made it longer. There are some more shots after this, but maybe there'll be a version 2. Who knows? Anyway, so there is a separate video about how to set this up, so there's no point me going through that now. Once you've watched that, you'll get to this point where what you see here is my plane, which has the image reference projected on it, and my cinematic camera, which is all living in my level sequence. I've made these assets spawnable, which means they belong to the container of the level sequence. Just to show you my folder structure, I've created a folder called animation under the content folder. And this is where I will be progressively adding new level sequences. These again are just containers. So if I actually close the sequencer now, right, it's empty. The level is completely empty. But, you know, if you make something spawnable, which means it belongs to the level sequence, if I double click on it now, it will load whatever is contained in that. So, and to make something spawnable, after you've brought it into your level sequence by simply dragging and dropping it from the outliner into here, is simply right clicking here, and then you choose convert selected bindings, and then you choose spawnable. That's why you got this sort of lightning bolt icon there. That sort of represents that it's spawnable. Anyway, this allowed me to then, you know, first work in stages. So blocking 01, I call this. This is where I would, you know, bring in my, you know, basic key posing. But right now, obviously, we don't have any characters. So what I'm going to do is bring those in. Now, how did I do that? Let's get into that part. Okay, so with the characters, there was a selection that you can download from the marketplace. So what I did was, if I go to the marketplace, now Fab brings up a browser, you have all these characters to choose from in the pack. So I looked at this and I'm like, I like the look of the mannequin. Funnily enough, he's at the top, so it's quite funny. There is this dude as well, which is interesting. I might try him out in the future. Anyway, I wanted to use him. So that character is called, once you've downloaded it and added it to your project, how you do that, simply when you load it up, you choose add to my library. What that does is it adds it to your account library, and once you log in to your Epic Games Store, it will come up under library here, under Fab Library, and then you just simply click add to project, and this is where you choose which project to add to. So these are all my projects that I've got here right now. So yeah, right now I added it to my demo project. So that's why you have a characters folder here now, and you got all these different characters. So if I open up Echo, go to this meshes, which is the skeletal mesh, you know, if I double click on her, It'll eventually load. Can take a little while to think. You know, this is one of the characters that I could have used and so forth. So you have a range to choose. Anyway, I decided to use the Unreal Fortnite mannequin, and that's what this character is here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag that into my scene. Bink, like that. Let's just activate my camera so I can see what's going on. So just by clicking that blue icon there. And I'm just going to drag him back. Now, I think my camera position is too close. I'm just going to bring it back a bit. Hit enter and it will set keyframes right there. All those attributes, aperture as well and all that. And you can all control those details here on the right when you select the camera. Alright, so I've got my skeletal mesh in the level. Now I want this to belong to the level sequence. I don't want it to belong to the level, because then what if the level updates and things. I want it to be an independent entity which contains all the animated assets, just easier to manage. So I'm going to now select my character here, the skeletal mesh, and drag it into my level sequence. So now it's there. So right now it's purely a skeleton and it's not rigged. So I need to add a rig to it. So I made it spawnable by right clicking on the skeletal mesh. Click on the plus icon here. Click control rig. Now we want to choose a control rig. You don't want to filter by skeleton. Disable that. I just want to type in mannequin. And there it is. There's the control rig of the mannequin, which is also used on the cyborg character. So I just want to click on that. And there you go. And now you have your rig. And what you'll see here is a new track called CR Mannequin Body. This is the track that holds all the attributes per controller. So right now, this is the rig. So by default, if you click on the main global control, you'll see here on the bottom right, let me just make sure you see it. So I'll bring it up here. On the bottom right here, you've got all the attributes. So I want to use IK arms, for example. And, the space of the pole vectors. At the moment, you've got parent, world, body, chest, clavicle. So you can choose which space you want to put them in. The legs are IK. And so from this moment forward, I would literally animate like I would do in Maya. So let me just roughly pose him with this. So let's jump in. Let's do a bit of this was done before. I'll show you a level sequence where my posing was done. Alright, so we have now did our first pass blocking. This is what you're seeing right now. So I went ahead and I brought in another skeletal mesh and assigned a control rig to it. And I also changed the shader of it. How I did that was simply in my characters folder, I duplicated the mannequin. Let me turn off that. So if I go to my meshes, sorry, wrong one. I should go in UEFN. There we go. And I duplicated the skeletal mesh and just changed the shader through the materials attributes, which you can, double click and find the materials associated to it. So if I do this now, and then this is the material, you can go and find it by clicking on that. And then by duplicating it, you create a duplicate material, and I double click on that, and I just change the color of it. That's all I did really. So nothing terribly exciting there. So what you see here is my first pass blocking. Now, one thing to do if you like working in step keys, I always turn off post-processing and motion blur. It should be off. I don't know why it's on. So what you need to do is check if you have a post-process volume, which I didn't have at the time. So you have to check your camera and see if motion blur is enabled there. So I'm just going to click on the camera, click on motion. Oh, wrong one. Motion blur. So I'm just going to activate it and put it to 0. So just to make sure that it's not activated, and just make sure it's all there. Hit G for game view. So now motion blur is deactivated. So yeah, I just went ahead and made sure my key poses are somewhat half decent, somewhat in balance. You know, it really is a first pass on breaking it down. The keyframes themselves, there are by, you know, I set them to stepped. So very quick way of doing that is, you know, if you just collapse the actual track, select, you know, the keys, you can just right click on it and choose what interpolation you want. So I wanted constant, which is stepped. So I went through this process, and if I wanted to then do a new, you know, an updated version of it, what I would do is go back to my animations folder, and I would start duplicating. So I'd literally right click here, duplicate, give it a new name, and then in that one I would open, say, blocking 03 now. Now there's more breakdowns, so I would, you know, keep adding more, keep duplicating until, you know, at one point I ended up going to primary, which is now my first spline pass. It's just a nice way of keeping record of your progress, up until the point where I was happy. So I got to a point, I'd say version 2, primary version 2, which is where I was starting to get a bit more happier with, you know, the general timing, a bit slow, but the, you know, a rough sort of spline pass where it's not necessarily, there isn't, the fidelity isn't there, the foot context and so forth. But I was at a point where I'm like, you know what, I want to have an environment now where I could actually start making it look cooler and making it feel like it's part of a scene. I create a basic wall, you know, a cube, just to give me an idea of roughly where I want the contact to be when he hits the wall. So what I did was I ended up going to the marketplace, you know, window, and then Fab. You know, Fab is the new marketplace, like I mentioned. And what I did was simply go in here and start looking for environments. So I would choose environment, say here, and then I would filter out what I want. So price, I wanted free. So I just basically clicked on that. And then it gave me a bunch of environments that I chose from. And then eventually it will show up here in your library and you can add it to your project. What I'm going to do now is open up that level. When you bring it in, it's a folder called Subway Train, and there's under Maps, there's a demonstration level and overview. So I wanted demonstration. It actually looked like this, you know, a full train with inside. But then what I did was, I'm like, well, I wanted the characters to be standing around here. So I ended up selecting these pieces here on the right side, and I just deleted stuff. And then I adjust the lighting, you know, I would, you know, grab the lights and readjust the intensity, the, you know, the position of them, etc., until I was kind of somewhat happy. So what I would do then is I would bring in, load in my animation here, bring in my camera, and this is where the characters aren't positioned yet. So I would have to then find my characters, which are here. So obviously I would have to reposition them in a place where I was happy with. Just make sure, you know, you kind of have it in an area where, you know, I would have to basically group select all the assets and bring them all to the position that I wanted them to be in, right? I would have to select the camera and everything and put them in a place, and then set a keyframe to that just to make sure that they, you know, they say their position. Okay. So once I did that, so let's go ahead of time and let's say, I think primary 5. Yeah, primary 5 was my sort of version where I started to, you know, position them in the right place. And then also, I don't know if you noticed, I added a subtle camera shake in there. And you can do that by adding a track to the camera. So under the camera component, there's an attribute called camera shake, which you can add. So what I did was I had to create a new blueprint to create like an automated camera shake. So what I did was in animation folder, I created a folder called FX. Here's one that already exists. There's like tutorials online on how to create a blueprint. That's what I did. So on YouTube and just look for how to create a camera shake, and it found me how to do it. So what I will do is right click here and then go to blueprint class, and then if you type in camera shake, and I believe it was called camera shake base. That's the one that we want to use. So I'll click on that, select, double click on here. So these are the attributes of my actual blueprint here. So of the shake. So I chose the Perlin noise camera like I mentioned. I didn't want any locational movement, so I set that to 0 here on the amplitude, and then rotational amplitude and frequency, very subtle and high, somewhat higher frequency. So you just experiment that, okay? And then once you've created that, you can then now add it to your camera track under your camera. Click on the plus, and then you attach camera shake to it, and then you choose your blueprint. I also, what I did was to sort of give the idea that we're underground is I created this sort of material cube, and I just added a material that glowed. Again, online tutorials about how to create a glowing material. That's what I simply did, and I'd simply just animate it back and forward. So if I actually choose that here, you'll see my keyframes. So after that, you know, once I was kind of happy with the scene, I would now start pushing further forward with the actual animation itself, making it more dynamic and so forth. So here I started adding more foot details, contacts and so forth. You know, a bit of feedback from Raoul as well about the impact, making that more, a bit more faster, the way he hits his back. So after I was done that, the question was now, can I move this animation to a Metahuman rig? So I'm going to show you that process next. So here's my animation back in the regular level that we last saw. Okay, and I was like, okay, let's now try and retarget this to a Metahuman and see what happens. All right. So what the first thing you got to do is that once you're done with an animation, say, at the moment all the keyframes are assigned to the control rig, right? What you need to do is bake it or convert it into an anim sequence. So what you need to do is right click here under the main blueprint or the scale mesh of say Bruce Lee or Bruce, and you right click and you do bake animation sequence. You do that, it will do its process, and then you end up with a bunch of sequences. I've got a lot of sequences that I did in the past, but I'll just do a new one now. So, right, bake animation sequence. Find a path, so I want it under animation. I'm just going to call this Bruce Demo Sequence, just for our purpose. Click on that. Click on everything by default. Export animation. And there he is. So now if I close this sequencer and I go here, and there it is. So now if I double click on the animation sequence, this is the animation that's directly on the skeletal mesh, no control rig. Cool. So the next thing you want to do with that same sequence, you right click on it retarget animations. This brings up a tool where you see your skeletal mesh and your source, which is your mannequin that you've been animating with, and you want to choose a target. So now I've already added the Metahuman assets to my project. How I did that, I'll show you in a minute. So I would just type in Metahuman, and then you would find male medium body. F means female. I'll keep scrolling down, and you want the default one. So yeah, M Med body mocap. Choose that, and there it is there. Ready to export. So now here you want to choose the anim sequence that we just created. So Bruce demo sequence. Double click, and there it is. The animation is now retargeted to a Metahuman. What you need to do now is export the animations. So now I'm going to call that, I'm going to put it in there in that same folder. Export, export, and now there it is there. So if I double click on that, it's the Metahuman one. Okay. So the next thing is I got the default Metahuman mesh assigned to it. What if you had your own custom one that you wanted to build? So let's go over that. So in order to create your own Metahuman, you go to the website Metahuman Creator. You just search that and it brings you to this page. So Metahuman Creator is loaded, and you just start off with a bunch of presets. And what I did was, you can actually start creating your own, and it will load it up. So then you can just zoom out. This was my Chuck Norris character, and this was and they're based off Christopher and Aoi. I don't know how you pronounce his name, but yeah. I changed his hairstyle. You know, you can just, you know, took off his top, his pants, so forth. So if you click, you know, edit, that's what you do, and this is where you would choose the hairstyles and the clothing, etc. So let's actually create one now, shall we? So I'm just going to create one from the preset. So let's say I wanted, I don't know, Brian, and then that's it. You're happy with it. You're like, okay, cool, done. So once you've actually done your editing in the Metahuman Creator, what you need to do is launch in Unreal Metahuman, your Metahuman in there. So you do that by the Quicksort bridge, and assuming that you've logged in with your account and stuff, the same login that you use for the Metahuman Creator, you'll find here under the face icon, you've got the presets, but then you've also got My Metahuman, so the one that you created. And this is the one that we just recently created called Brian. So if I clicked on him, you can actually download it and then add it to your project. And that's how it gets migrated to your content browser. So essentially, you'll end up with a Metahumans folder here. And I've already got a folder called Aoi and Christopher. So now I've got those characters in my project. So now let's bring in the Metahuman anim sequence, the Metahuman character mesh, and let's make it all work together. Okay, so we're back into our anim sequence that we had with the mannequins. I'm going to go into my content browser, and I'm going to find my Metahuman. So let's do that, shall we? So I've got Oya here, the blueprint here. So now I'm just going to drag him in, say, there. So there he is there in the outliner. Now I'm going to drag and drop that into my sequencer. Now automatically with the blueprint he assigns a control rig. Now we don't need the control rig because we have an anim sequence to apply to it, and an anim sequence can only work on a skeletal mesh, not a control rig. So what I'm going to do is choose Oi here, And there's the Metahuman control rig. You literally can just hit delete. Now there's no rig, it's just a skeleton. What I want to do now is click on the plus icon here under the body, animation track. Now we're going to choose the Bruce anim sequence that we just did. Click there, and there you go. So obviously it's based on where your timeline is. So my timeline was set in the wrong place. So let's just drag the animation back here. There's an offset as well because my handle was involved in the anim sequence. So there we go. And there he is. So pretty straightforward. Now I can just reposition him correctly. Yeah. And the great thing is I'm going to mute now my mannequin so you don't see him. Now, let's say you wanted to edit the animation. There's two ways of doing this. You can either now completely convert this back onto a control rig, but you're working with baked keyframes on a control rig, or you can use the layered control rig. A layered control rig is basically an additive rig that sits on top of the skeletal mesh, and it doesn't need to bake. It's like following the joints dynamically. That's the process I used. If I wasn't using that, I would use the bake to control rig method, but then I would then use the animation layers to do my edits. So there's different workflows you can do. So I'm just going to showcase both of those very quickly. So here I'm going to first bake to a control rig. So you right click on the body skeletal mesh and you do bake to control rig. We don't want to filter skeleton asset by skeleton. That way you just get to see all the control rigs. What we want is the Metahuman control rig. Let's create that. Everything by default. And there it is. So it's the same animation now on the control rig. So now you can go ahead. But as you can see in the control rig, if I expand that, keyframes everywhere. Everywhere. So you can actually just select the group node of that. I want to switch it to IK arms. Make sure that attribute is applied everywhere. So you want to select IK arm there, IK arm there. Good thing about 5.5, you can isolate selected tracks. So that's what I'm going to do here, just by clicking on that. I'm just going to make sure. So now everything's selected there. I make sure they are on and off. So now everything should be, yep, all IK now. Now you want to modify the animations. So what you can actually do now in 5.5 is animation layers. So let's say like in Maya, you know, you wanted to refine, I don't know, the body control. So you click on the body control. And here on the top, you've got layers. Click on that. With the thing still selected, you add a layer. Let's call it Bruce Cog. And there it is. So now what happens is it creates a new track under there called Bruce Cog. And there's no keyframes in there. So let's say I want a keyframe here. I want a keyframe here. And let's say I wanted to, I don't know, drop him lower as he's doing that. There you go. You can control the weight of this layer as well, which is great, by here. So all a familiar process in that regard. So that's one method. Okay, so let's now go with the other option, which is by using a layered control rig. So you click on the skeletal mesh here of the body, click on the plus, go all the way to the top here to it says control rig. And you want to switch on layered, turn off filter asset by skeleton, don't need that. Now let's find the Metahuman, just type in meta, there it is. So now you still got your anim sequence active, but now the control rig is following it. So here I would do the same process. I would make sure my arms are in IK throughout. It sets a keyframe by default. So now the great thing is I'm going to do the same process where I'll click on the cog. Let's say I set a keyframe there, hit S, or you can use auto keyframe, whatever you want. here, keyframe here, and let's say I want to drop down, and there you go. You can achieve the same result. So you can literally work like this with a layered control rig. So essentially I did that throughout, and I ended up with this result, which I'm going to show you. So let's go to here's one I did earlier. So here's later in line where I used a layered control rig for my animation. So here you can see I've got one here for Bruce. You know, and I mostly worked with, for example, here was looking at his hands and his fingers, but I did more of the editing in Chuck or Christopher. You can see here there's more keyframes I created throughout. So let's have a look where I actually modified things. His thumbs, his hands as usual. Let's have a look at his body control. His body was I was pretty happy with. His arm position. Here there's a moment where I just wanted to fix the trajectory a bit more. Definitely with the head, you know, the head control needed some refinement. I found that when I was using the Metahuman now, the head direction was a little off, so I went in there and created new keyframes for that. So I worked in this method using a layered control rig, and then once you're happy with that, you can bake it back down back to a brand new anim sequence, and you know, there's your result at the end of it. So yeah, I hope that was somewhat useful. A lot of online tutorials and things that I checked, but it's certainly enjoyable to animate in Unreal. Same process generally was keyframing. It's just knowing where things are stacked and laid out in the sequencer. Yeah, that's more or less it. So, thanks.